She is not my mom. The little black girl signed the words with trembling fingers before pushing a navy blue passport into Ethan Whitmore's hand. For half a second, the billionaire only stared at her. Then the white woman beside the child lunged across the first-class seat so fast her champagne glass tipped over, pale gold liquid bleeding across the armrest. "Naomi," she snapped too quickly. "Give me that." But Ethan had already seen the sticker covering the father's name. For hours earlier, Ethan Whitmore had boarded Flight 22 to Geneva carrying a leather briefcase full of merger contracts worth nearly $2 billion and a headache that felt permanently lodged behind his eyes. The first-class cabin smelled faintly of espresso, wool coats damp from Manhattan rain, and the expensive citrus perfume of the woman seated across the aisle. Outside the oval windows, JFK disappeared beneath sheets of silver cloud. Ethan loosened his tie slightly and glanced down at the stack of documents in front of him. Lawyers, numbers, signatures, every page demanding another decision from a man who had spent 20 years making them without hesitation. His phone buzzed once against the tray table. A text from his younger sister's old number. Of course it wasn't really her. That number had belonged to a disconnected line for 6 years now, but spam messages still found it somehow. He deleted the notification without opening it. Across the aisle, the little girl sat unnaturally still beside the blonde woman in cream-colored cashmere. About 7 years old. Thin shoulders. Dark braids slightly uneven, as if someone had redone them in a hurry. She wore mismatched socks beneath a wrinkled navy dress that looked too light for February weather. Ethan noticed her because she never once touched the dessert placed in front of her. Kids always reached for dessert first. This child held the spoon but never ate. The woman beside her smiled often, but only with her mouth. "Naomi's been anxious since takeoff," she explained to the flight attendant in a polished Connecticut accent. "She's had a difficult year." Naomi lowered her eyes immediately when the woman touched her shoulder. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but Ethan did. It reminded him of shelter dogs he had once seen during a charity event years ago. Animals that flinched before they were hit because eventually they learned hands could change moods without warning. He looked away almost immediately, irritated with himself. He was tired. Overtired people imagined stories where none existed. A few minutes later, while most of the cabin dimmed into quiet blue light, Ethan felt something brush his sleeve. He turned. Naomi stood beside his seat clutching a navy passport against her chest with both hands. Up close, he could see faint dry cracks along her knuckles. The child glanced once toward the woman now sleeping beneath a cashmere blanket. Then Naomi signed carefully, deliberately, like she had practiced the words in her mind many times before. "She is not my mom." Ethan frowned slightly. "What?" Naomi swallowed hard and pushed the passport into his hand anyway. Before he could react, the woman's eyes snapped open. She moved instantly. Too instantly. "Naomi!" she barked, grabbing for the passport hard enough to tear one corner. Several passengers looked over now. The woman forced a strained laugh. "I'm so sorry," she said breathlessly. "She has trauma-related episodes. She invents things sometimes." Ethan should have handed it back immediately. Instead, his thumb caught the edge of the passport page that had partially slipped loose during the struggle. Just enough to reveal the child's last name. Naomi Brooks. Ethan slowly looked up at the woman. "Your last name is Hale," he said quietly. For the first time since boarding the plane, the woman stopped smiling. For a moment, the only sound between them was the low hum of the aircraft engines and the faint clink of ice shifting inside a glass somewhere farther down the cabin. Vanessa Hale recovered first. People like her usually did. Her expression softened again with almost mechanical precision, polished into something warm enough for strangers to trust. "Naomi was adopted," she explained gently, smoothing the sleeve of her cream cashmere coat as though nothing unusual had happened. The paperwork process was complicated. She kept her biological surname for emotional stability. Ethan still held the passport loosely in one hand. Naomi had moved back into her seat now, knees tucked inward, fingers gripping the strap of her faded backpack so tightly her knuckles looked pale beneath brown skin. She stared at the dark airplane window instead of either adult. That's fairly common, Vanessa continued with a graceful little shrug, especially with children who come from traumatic backgrounds. The flight attendant nearby nodded sympathetically. Ethan almost did too. Almost. But something small kept pressing against the back of his mind. Not one dramatic thing. Just tiny details refusing to settle correctly. Naomi still had not called the woman Mom. Not once. And every time Vanessa touched her shoulder, the child seemed to stop breathing for half a second before forcing herself still again. Ethan finally handed the passport back. Of course, he said calmly. Vanessa smiled in visible relief and slid the document into her designer handbag immediately. Too immediately. Then she turned toward Naomi with the bright patience adults used when they wanted witnesses to see them trying. Honey, you scared people, she said softly. You know we talked about stories. Naomi lowered her eyes. Yes, ma'am, she whispered. The answer landed strangely. Not rude. Not frightened exactly. Just rehearsed. Ethan leaned back into his seat and reopened the merger file on his tray table. But he wasn't reading anymore. His gaze drifted sideways instead. Naomi's backpack sat half open beneath the seat in front of her. A small stuffed rabbit peeked from inside, one ear nearly torn off. Beside it lay a folded children's sweatshirt and a hospital bracelet twisted around one of the straps. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. St. Gabriel Pediatric Oncology Unit. The bracelet looked old enough for the ink to fade. Vanessa noticed him looking. She keeps junk, she said lightly. I'm trying to teach her to let go of unhealthy attachments. Naomi's hand immediately covered the backpack opening, protecting it. Again too fast. A few rows ahead, a muted television screen flickered silently with late night. Financial news while most of first class settled deeper into sleep. The cabin lights dimmed further. Somewhere behind them, a spoon tapped softly against porcelain. Ethan reached for his water glass, but his phone vibrated before he could lift it. He glanced down automatically. One missed call from Marcus Bell, head of security at Whitmore Foundation. The timestamp caught his attention. 2 hours ago. Beneath it sat a text message. Call me before you land. It's about Hale Children's Services. Ethan stared at the screen a second longer than necessary, then slowly looked across the aisle at Vanessa. She had closed her eyes again, but her fingers were still awake, moving faintly against the armrest as though counting seconds. Naomi suddenly shifted in her seat. Very carefully, she slipped one hand into her backpack and pulled something halfway out before hiding it beneath the thin airline blanket across her lap. Ethan only caught a glimpse. A Polaroid photograph with one burned corner. Naomi looked directly at him for the first time since the passport incident. Then, without speaking, she turned the photo just enough for him to read the sentence written across the back in faded blue ink. If she asks for help, believe her. Naomi did not hold the Polaroid out at first. She kept it low under the blanket. Her fingers pressed along the burned corner as if the photograph itself might run away if she loosened her grip. Ethan looked at the words once, then again, careful not to react too quickly. In rooms full of lawyers, men gave themselves away by blinking. In rooms with frightened children, adults did the same thing by believing too loudly. Who wrote that? He asked, barely above the engine noise. Naomi's eyes flicked toward Vanessa, then back to him. Her mouth stayed closed, but one small finger tapped the front of the photo. Ethan leaned just enough to see the image. A man stood outside a brick building in Queens, holding Naomi on one hip when she was younger. He had tired eyes, a crooked tie, and the exhausted gentleness of someone who had been telling the truth for too long without being heard. Ethan knew that face. Daniel Brooks. For a second, the first-class cabin. Disappeared and Ethan saw a marble lobby 3 years earlier. Security guards closing around a desperate former attorney, while Ethan walked past with donors smiling at his back. Daniel had shouted his name then. Ethan remembered that part now. He also remembered not stopping. Where did you get this? Ethan asked. Naomi lifted her chin a little. Daddy gave it to me. Vanessa's eyes opened. Naomi. One word. Soft, but sharpened underneath. The child's hand tightened around the photograph. "He said not to lose it," Naomi whispered. Vanessa sat forward and extended her hand, smiling for the passengers who were pretending not to listen. "Sweetheart, that picture makes you sad. Give it to me." Naomi shook her head once. "Not wild. Not dramatic. Just no." Ethan noticed Vanessa's smile thin at the edges. "Daniel Brooks wasn't your father," Vanessa said, still soft. "We talked about this. He was confused near the end." Naomi looked at the carpet. "He picked me up at 6:20. Vanessa paused. "What?" "The night you said he didn't come," Naomi whispered. "He came at 6:20. The microwave clock was blinking, but the stove clock said 6:20. He wore the blue coat. He smelled like rain." Ethan felt something in his chest shift. Children invented monsters. They did not usually invent broken microwave clocks and wet wool. Vanessa gave a delicate laugh that did not reach her eyes. "Trauma memories are unreliable." Then she reached for her handbag. Too fast. Ethan saw the edge of the passport inside beside a second boarding pass, folded backward. He also saw another name printed on it before she pushed it down with her palm. Maya Reed. Naomi saw it too. Her face changed, not with confusion but recognition. Ethan caught that. "Who is Maya Reed?" he asked. Vanessa's hand froze inside the bag. "A staff member," she said. "Travel coordinator." "Then why is her boarding pass with the child's passport?" Vanessa looked at him for one clean second too long. Before she could answer, Naomi slowly pulled her sock down and removed something taped against her ankle with a strip of white medical tape. A tiny silver USB drive slid into her palm. "Daddy said," she whispered, "if the lady with the perfume took the picture, give you this instead." Ethan looked at Vanessa's cream coat, at the citrus perfume still hanging in the cooled cabin air, and understood the Polaroid had never been the only clue. Vanessa's expression changed so slightly most people would have missed it. Not anger, not panic, calculation. The kind practiced in charity ballrooms and television interviews where reputations survived by controlling the temperature of a room before anyone noticed smoke. She leaned back slowly into the leather seat and folded her hands across her lap. "Mr. Whitmore," she said with calm embarrassment, "I'm afraid Daniel Brooks filled that child's head with delusions before he died." Naomi's fingers closed around the USB so tightly the edges pressed white marks into her skin. "He wasn't delusional," she whispered. Vanessa ignored her completely. That more than anything made Ethan uncomfortable. Adults who cared about children usually spoke to them, even while correcting them. Vanessa spoke around Naomi as though the little girl were paperwork. "Daniel had severe paranoia near the end," she continued softly. "You can verify that with legal records. He believed Hale Children's Services was targeting him after we removed Naomi from an unsafe environment." Ethan said nothing yet. Across the cabin, a man in a charcoal suit lowered his newspaper just enough to listen. The flight attendant nearest them suddenly became overly attentive to rearranging silverware on an empty tray. Everyone could feel something pulling tighter in the air now. Vanessa turned toward Naomi again with practiced patience. "Sweetheart," she said, "give me the flash drive." Naomi shook her head once. "No, you don't even know what's on it." "Yes, I do." Vanessa smiled carefully. "Then tell us." Naomi looked down at the USB. "Daddy said if I talked before the plane landed, they'd take me away again." Ethan caught the word again. Again. Vanessa gave a soft sigh, almost maternal. "This is exactly what I mean." Daniel encouraged unhealthy fantasies. Naomi struggles with attachment and memory confusion. Then she added the sentence quietly enough to sound compassionate instead of cruel. "Children from unstable homes often create stories to feel safe." Ethan finally spoke. "What unstable home?" Vanessa's eyes moved to him immediately. "Her biological mother disappeared after a psychiatric episode," she replied. "There were drugs involved. Daniel took temporary custody illegally. We intervened." Naomi's head snapped up at that. "That's a lie. Not loud. Not emotional. Just flat and immediate." Several nearby passengers looked over fully now. Vanessa's smile tightened by less than an inch. Naomi. She worked nights, the little girl whispered. At the hospital. Vanessa's voice stayed smooth. Sweetheart, your mother was sick. Naomi stared straight ahead. She packed my lunch every morning at 5:40. Ethan looked at her. You remember the time? Naomi nodded faintly. Because she burned the toast a lot when she was tired. Silence settled over the row. Tiny details again. Not dramatic claims. Burned toast. Lunch at 5:40 in the morning. The kind of memory children carried because it belonged to real life instead of fear. Vanessa reached slowly into her handbag and removed her phone. Ethan noticed she angled the screen away immediately after unlocking it. I think it's best if airport security meets us at the gate, she said gently. For Naomi's safety. Naomi went completely still. Her thumb rubbed against the edge of the USB over and over. Ethan saw it then. A faded hospital adhesive mark circling her wrist beneath her sleeve, as if something had been removed recently. Not a bracelet from years ago. Recent. Vanessa followed his eyes and immediately tugged Naomi's sleeve lower. Too late. Ethan's phone buzzed again against the tray table. Another message from Marcus Bell. This one shorter. Do not let Hale leave the airport with the child. Ethan looked at the text, then slowly back at Vanessa. She was already watching him now. Still composed. Still elegant. But beneath the citrus perfume and cashmere calm, he noticed something colder for the first time. She was no longer trying to convince him Naomi was confused. She was trying to make sure nobody listened long enough for the child to keep talking. Then Naomi quietly lifted the USB between both hands and said the one thing that emptied the warmth from Vanessa's face completely. If it's only lies, the little girl asked softly. Why were you looking for this in Daddy's apartment the night he died? Vanessa did not answer right away. For the first time since Ethan had noticed her, she looked less like a polished philanthropist and more like someone calculating exits. Her fingers tightened around her phone. Daniel Brooks was unstable, she said carefully. He blamed many people for his death before it even happened. Naomi's eyes hardened at the sentence. Not angry, hurt. The kind of hurt that had lived too long inside a child already tired of hearing adults rewrite someone she loved. He wasn't dead when he said it, Naomi whispered. The engines shifted pitch slightly as the plane crossed turbulence. A few overhead lights flickered once before stabilizing again. Ethan watched Vanessa closely now. She had stopped trying to comfort Naomi, stopped pretending entirely. Everything in her posture had narrowed into control. Give me the drive, she said softly. Naomi slowly shook her head. Then, before Vanessa could move again, the little girl reached into the backpack beside her feet and removed something wrapped inside a faded gray sweatshirt. Ethan expected another paper, another photograph maybe. Instead, Naomi placed an old black flip phone into his hand. The plastic casing was scratched near the charging port. One corner had been repaired with clear tape. It doesn't call anymore, Naomi said quietly. But Daddy kept it charged. Ethan turned the phone over slowly. Old model, at least 10 years outdated. The kind lawyers carried before encrypted apps and facial recognition. What's on it? Naomi looked down at her lap. Only one number. Vanessa inhaled sharply. Tiny. Barely audible. But Ethan heard it. He pressed the side button. The screen glowed weakly blue before unlocking without a password. No apps. No photos visible. No contacts except one. Ethan W. Ethan stared at it longer than he should have. Daniel kept my number on a dead phone? Naomi nodded. He said if something happened, rich people stop answering new numbers first. The sentence settled heavily into the quiet cabin. Ethan remembered something then. 3 years ago, his assistant had filtered dozens of calls after the scandal investigation around Whitmore Foundation. Unknown numbers blocked. Voicemails erased before reaching him. Daniel Brooks had called repeatedly during that month. Ethan knew because he had once complained about the notifications interrupting a board meeting. Slowly, he opened the voicemail folder on the old phone. One message remained unsent in drafts. Timestamped 11:43 p.m. the night Daniel died. Ethan pressed play. Static crackled first. Then Daniel's exhausted voice filled the space between the seats. If this reaches you, don't trust the reports. A sharp breath. Traffic noise somewhere nearby. The files were moved before midnight. Hale knows I copied them. Ethan felt Naomi watching him now. Daniel continued, quieter. There's a child involved. Her records were changed after St. Gabriel. The message clipped suddenly, as if interrupted. Then another sound entered the recording. A woman's voice in the distance. Calm. Distinct. Daniel opened the door. Vanessa went completely still. Ethan replayed the final 3 seconds once more. Daniel, the woman repeated softly through the speaker. Open the door. Ethan looked up slowly. Vanessa's face had lost all remaining warmth. That proves nothing, she said immediately. Too immediately. Ethan lowered the phone into his palm. His memory moved backward without permission now. Charity galas. Foundation meetings. Fundraisers. Vanessa Hale laughing beside board members. Vanessa Hale introducing pediatric initiatives on stage.
Vanessa Hale turustet everhere.
Trusted by him. Naomi carefully reached over and closed the flip phone before the voicemail could restart again. Then she whispered the sentence that made Ethan's stomach tighten colder than before. She wore the same perfume that night. Ethan replayed the voicemail a third time after Vanessa finally leaned back into silence. Not because he needed to hear Daniel's voice again. Because he needed to hear the woman's voice behind it. Calm. Familiar. Certain. Daniel opened the door. The plane cabin had grown quieter now, the kind of deep overnight silence broken only by engine vibration and the occasional clink of ice from abandoned glasses. Naomi sat curled near the window, hugging the backpack against her chest, while Vanessa stared ahead with rigid stillness, pretending not to watch Ethan anymore. That frightened him more than panic would have. Calm people usually believed systems would protect them. Ethan lowered the flip phone beneath the tray table and opened his own cell phone without drawing attention. His thumb moved quickly across the screen. Marcus Bell answered on the second ring. You're still in the air? Marcus asked quietly. Ethan kept his eyes on the dark cabin. Run a private check on Hale Children's Services. A pause. Already started. I want sealed court records too. Foster transfers. Medical affiliations. Anything involving St. Gabriel Pediatric Oncology. Another pause. Longer this time. Ethan, Marcus said carefully. Why St. Gabriel? Ethan looked toward Naomi. The child had fallen half asleep against the window, but even sleeping she kept one hand wrapped around the backpack strap. Because a dead lawyer left a voicemail naming it. Marcus did not react immediately. Ethan trusted him because Marcus almost never reacted immediately. I'll send what I find before landing, he said at last. Ethan ended the call and slipped the phone away just as Vanessa glanced over. Business never stops for you, does it? She asked pleasantly. Unfortunately not. That's probably why people trust you, she said. Consistency. Ethan nodded once, though something about the word lingered unpleasantly after she said it. Trust. Across the aisle, Naomi stirred awake as a flight attendant quietly placed a fresh cup of tea beside Vanessa. The woman thanked her warmly by name. Olivia. Ethan noticed that too. People like Vanessa remembered service workers' names because it made cruelty harder to accuse. Naomi looked at the untouched tea, then at Ethan. Can I have water? She asked softly. Vanessa reached for the bottle immediately. I'll open it for you. Naomi pulled back before the cap turned. No thank you, she said politely. I can do it. Ethan watched the exchange without speaking. Such a small thing. But children who felt safe rarely guarded ordinary water bottles like evidence. A few minutes later, the cabin lights dimmed further for landing preparation. Outside the windows, rain streaked faintly across the black sky over the Atlantic. Somewhere behind the galley curtain, a tiny television played an old sitcom too softly to make out words. Ethan opened the merger folder again, though his attention stayed elsewhere. Then his phone vibrated once against the leather seat. Marcus. Ethan opened the secure attachment carefully beneath the tray table. 3 files. First, Hale Children's Services had transferred 27 minors overseas within 18 months through emergency medical exemptions. Second, multiple sealed complaints dismissed without trial. Third, a scanned internal memo from Whitmore Foundation itself. Ethan's eyes stopped there. The memo was old. 3 years old. Authorized partnership review approved by Executive Board Liaison Caroline Whitmore. Ethan stared at the name. His older sister. The one person inside the foundation he had trusted without question for nearly a decade. Another line beneath it tightened something cold inside his chest. Security footage archive from St. Gabriel Pediatric Oncology incomplete. Missing interval. 11:08 p.m. to 11:15 p.m. 7 minutes. Ethan slowly looked up from the screen. Across the aisle, Vanessa had finally closed her eyes again beneath the soft amber reading light. But Naomi was awake now, watching him carefully over the top edge of her blanket. Then, very quietly, the little girl whispered the sentence that made the missing 7 minutes feel suddenly enormous. That's when my mom disappeared. The seatbelt sign chimed softly overhead as the aircraft began its slow descent through heavy clouds. Rain streaked across the windows in thin silver lines, blurring the scattered lights of the coastline below. Ethan locked his phone screen and sat very still for several seconds after reading Marcus's message. 7 missing minutes. Authorized by Caroline Whitmore. His sister's name remained burned into his mind harder than any accusation Naomi had made so far. Across the aisle, Vanessa adjusted the sleeve of her cashmere coat and finally spoke again. I imagine this has all become very entertaining for the cabin, she said quietly. But when we land, Naomi will be exhausted. I'd rather not make a spectacle out of a traumatized child. Ethan folded his hands calmly over the merger folder. Of course. The simplicity of the answer seemed to unsettle her more than confrontation would have. Naomi noticed it too. The little girl sat straighter beneath the airline blanket, the old backpack pressed against her knees like armor. Ethan glanced toward the galley where a tiny green camera light blinked near the first-class service station. Recording remained active during landing preparation. Good. You said Naomi's mother disappeared after a psychiatric episode, Ethan said conversationally. Vanessa nodded once. Unfortunately. And Daniel Brooks kidnapped her afterward? Essentially, yes. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Then there should be police reports. There were. Filed where? Vanessa paused. Tiny. But long enough. New Jersey initially, she answered. Then transferred. Ethan gave a thoughtful nod as though the answer satisfied him. Didn't. Naomi's fingers slowly tightened around the edge of her blanket. Ethan noticed she was watching Vanessa's handbag instead of her face. Watching it the way children watch dangerous dogs. What hospital did Naomi's mother work at? Ethan asked lightly. Vanessa smiled again, but this time it came slower. I don't remember the exact. St. Gabriel? Naomi interrupted softly. Vanessa's eyes flashed toward her. Naomi kept going anyway. 3rd floor children's wing. Night shift. Ethan remained perfectly calm. Interesting, he said. Because you just told me her mother was unstable. Vanessa folded her arms. Mental illness doesn't prevent employment. No, Ethan agreed. But disappearing employees usually leave paperwork. Silence settled again. Somewhere nearby, ice shifted in an untouched water glass. Naomi carefully reached into her backpack without taking her eyes off Vanessa. Can I show him the drawing? She asked. Vanessa answered too quickly. No, Ethan looked at her immediately. Vanessa corrected herself with a softer tone. It upsets her. Naomi had already removed the folded paper. Childish crayon lines covered most of it. A hospital hallway. Blue doors. A woman with dark curls holding a little girl's hand. But in the upper corner, drawn almost as an afterthought, sat a small black dome with a blinking red dot beside it. Ethan stared at it longer than expected. What's this? Naomi pointed with one finger. The camera outside room 312. Vanessa shifted in her seat. Naomi continued quietly. It blinked red when people watched. Ethan felt the air around the row tighten. And Naomi looked down at the drawing. The red light stopped blinking that night. Vanessa leaned forward immediately. She was 6 years old, she said firmly. Children confuse memories all the time. Ethan never looked away from the drawing. Do they usually remember where cameras were mounted? Vanessa said nothing. Naomi swallowed once, then added the detail that changed the entire shape of the silence between them. Daddy said the camera stopped exactly 7 minutes before my mom disappeared. The plane wheels lowered beneath the cabin floor with a heavy mechanical thud. Vanessa's face lost color for the first time since takeoff. And in that moment, she finally understood something far worse than the child still talking. Ethan Whitmore was listening now. The aircraft touched the runway with a long trembling screech that rolled through the cabin floor beneath their feet. Nobody in first class spoke during the first seconds after landing. Rain streaked sideways across the windows under the floodlights outside, turning the airport into blurred gold and silver smears against the dark. Vanessa reached for her handbag the moment the wheels stabilized. Ethan noticed Naomi notice it too. The little girl's body tightened instantly beneath the blanket. "We'll go straight through private customs," Vanessa said smoothly, already recovering some of her composure. "Naomi is exhausted." Ethan nodded once. "I'm sure she is." The calmness in his voice made Vanessa hesitate again. Naomi slowly slid one hand into her backpack beneath the seat. Ethan saw her fingers searching quickly through the contents, not panicked, looking for something specific. Then the cabin lights brightened fully for arrival, and Naomi suddenly froze. Ethan followed her eyes downward. Vanessa's handbag had tipped slightly open during landing. Inside, partially exposed beside the passport, sat a thin white envelope stamped with the Whitmore Foundation seal. Naomi whispered before she could stop herself. "That's hers." Vanessa immediately snapped the bag shut. Too late. Ethan had already seen enough. "Open it," he said quietly. Vanessa forced a small laugh. "Mr. Whitmore, this is becoming absurd. Open the envelope." Something in his tone changed the air around them. No volume, no anger, just certainty. Even the nearby flight attendant stopped pretending not to listen anymore. Vanessa stared at him for 2 long seconds before finally pulling the envelope out with measured irritation. "These are sealed legal documents involving a child," she said. "I'm not comfortable," Naomi interrupted softly. "It has my mommy's name." Ethan held out his hand. Vanessa did not move. Then his phone buzzed once. Marcus Bell. One attachment received. Ethan opened it without breaking eye contact with Vanessa. A DNA report filled the screen. Whitmore Fertility Research Program. Subject match probability 99.98%. Ethan's vision narrowed around the words beneath it. Biological father Ethan Michael Whitmore. For one suspended second, he forgot the cabin, the rain, the passengers, the plane. Naomi sat across from him, clutching a torn stuffed rabbit while the proof glowed cold and clinical in his hand. His daughter. His chest tightened so sharply he almost didn't hear Naomi speaking. "She said my mommy signed papers," the little girl whispered. "But mommy cried after." Ethan looked up slowly. Vanessa had gone pale now. Truly pale. "That report was never finalized," she said immediately. "The sample chain was corrupted during the investigation." Ethan said nothing. Naomi carefully reached into her backpack one final time and removed a folded piece of paper protected inside a clear sandwich bag. The edges were water damaged. Child-sized fingerprints stained one corner in faded purple. "Marker. Daddy told me not to let anyone throw it away," Naomi said. Ethan unfolded it slowly. An original consent form from Whitmore Fertility Center. Signed by Angela Reed. Signed by Ethan Whitmore. But halfway down the page, a second paragraph had been added in different font alignment and darker ink authorizing transfer of custodial guardianship under medical emergency exemption. Ethan recognized corporate revision formatting instantly. One page swapped into an original contract after signatures. His stomach turned cold. Naomi pointed to the bottom corner with one small finger. Mommy circled that before she disappeared. Ethan looked closer. Tiny handwritten words sat beside the altered paragraph in blue pen. This wasn't here when I signed. Ethan could not speak for several seconds, because he knew the handwriting. Not Angela's. Caroline Whitmore's. His sister had initialed the approval directly beneath it. Outside the plane windows, airport security vehicles rolled slowly through the rain toward the terminal gates. Vanessa finally found her voice again. Ethan, please listen carefully. He folded the contract once, very neatly. Then he placed the DNA report on top of it and looked directly at her for the first time without uncertainty left in his face. Don't touch the child again, he said calmly. Then he picked up his phone and added, call my attorney. 3 months later, the glass boardroom on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Foundation looked colder than Ethan remembered. Not because of the winter storm outside, because for the first time in years, nobody inside the room trusted the polished language anymore. Lawyers sat along one wall with thick binders open. Federal investigators moved quietly between conference tables collecting drives and financial records. No one raised their voice. The silence itself had become the punishment. Caroline Whitmore resigned before noon. Hale Children's Services lost federal certification by the end of the week. Several emergency adoption transfers were frozen under court order while investigators reopened missing child cases tied to falsified medical exemptions. Vanessa Hale never appeared on television again. Ethan watched most of it happen without satisfaction. Exposure did not feel triumphant when he kept remembering how many chances he had once ignored to stop it sooner. Daniel Brooks' name was publicly cleared after forensic auditors proved records had been altered inside Whitmore Foundation before his death. The foundation established a legal defense fund for affected families, but Ethan refused to let the announcement carry his face. No more charity photographs, he told the board quietly. If we help people now, we do it because they were harmed, not because cameras are watching. Naomi did not move into the Whitmore mansion immediately. Ethan never asked her to. Instead, he rented a brownstone in Brooklyn near her school, while attorneys finalized custody protections and reopened the investigation into Angela Reed's disappearance. 2 weeks after the flight, Angela was found alive in a protected medical facility under another name after years of psychiatric manipulation tied to falsified records and over-medication. The first time Naomi saw her again, neither of them spoke for almost a full minute. Angela simply knelt in the hallway and held her daughter while Naomi clutched the old stuffed rabbit between them like proof that neither one had imagined the other. Ethan stood several feet away and looked down because some reunions felt too sacred to watch directly. Winter settled slowly over the city after that. Life became quieter, smaller, more honest. Naomi started sleeping through the night. Angela returned to nursing part-time at a pediatric clinic funded independently from the foundation that had once buried her complaints. Daniel Brooks' photograph was placed back into a proper frame in the living room beside a handwritten note from Naomi that read, "He told the truth even when nobody listened." One rainy Thursday evening, Ethan arrived at the brownstone carrying takeout containers and a stack of legal files he never opened. The kitchen lights glowed warm against the dark windows. Somewhere upstairs, the washing machine thumped softly through another cycle. Naomi sat at the kitchen island doing math homework with her tongue pressed slightly against her lip. In concentration, Angela stirred soup at the stove wearing hospital scrubs again for the first time in years. Normal sounds, quiet sounds, the kind rich men spent fortunes trying to recreate after destroying them accidentally. Ethan set the food down and noticed the old flip phone resting near the fruit bowl. Still there. Naomi followed his eyes. "I keep it charged," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Why?" Naomi shrugged one shoulder. "Because sometimes the last thing someone leaves you is proof they tried." Ethan looked at her for a long moment after that. Then Naomi closed her workbook, reached into her backpack, and carefully placed the old passport in front of him on the kitchen counter. The sticker covering the father's name had finally been removed completely weeks ago, but the torn edge still remained. "I used to think nobody saw me," Naomi said quietly. Rain tapped against the window above the sink while the washing machine hummed downstairs and steam curled softly from the soup pot between them. Naomi looked at Ethan with calm eyes, no longer asking permission to exist. But Daddy said the truth only stays invisible until somebody finally decides to look at it. Ethan could not answer right away, because after everything Power had hidden, erased, rewritten, and buried, it was a little black girl holding a torn passport in first class who had forced an entire world to finally look back.